Odo's confused. Quark gave him a tip about someone smuggling dodgy goods to Bajor, and, against all odds, it turned out that he was telling the truth. There's got to be an angle there somewhere, but he can't find one, and it's driving him batty. That, as Quark explains to Rom once Odo has gone, is exactly why he did it. That's enough guff, so let's get to the main plot. One of Quark's customers wants to know if anybody plans on popping down to Bajor in the near future. She was given something to deliver, but won't be able to visit before she leaves. It's odd, though. The item in question is a Bajoran earring, and it was apparently given to her by a cardigan. And there's something special about it, as she was told to just show it to any Bajoran, and they'd understand. Quark takes it off her hands, and, surprisingly, doesn't just try to sell it. Instead, he goes to see Kira and shows it to her. If he was looking for a valuation, he's disappointed. Kira takes the earring and, after hearing where it came from, exits in a hurry and leaves Quark in her apartment. We'll assume the ever-present implied threat of violence is enough to prevent him from half-inching anything of value. Over on the promenade, Jake's talking to his dad about asking a girl out. Not the process, as his offer was already accepted, but rather the activity. Seems like the sort of thing to think about first to me, but maybe that's the spicy brain tendency to overthink everything. Anywho, a choice of activity is proving to be a problem. Sisko doesn't want his son taking a date into a holodeck, and he says their quarters are out of bounds too. The problem is there's not much for teenagers to do here, and Sisko's suggestion of walk on the promenade and watch the wormhole isn't really cutting it. The arrival of Kira has Jake going off to think of his own ideas. She wants to talk to Sisko about this earring. Actually, that's not true. She doesn't want to talk to him about it, but there's no way he'll let her take a megashuttle if she doesn't. The earring, we learn, is from a former resistance leader called Lee Nalas, and a very popular one. He's also supposed to be a very dead one, but Kira thinks his earring being sent here is a suggestion that he's still alive and being held by the Cardigans on one of their planets. That's why she wants the megashuttle, to go and rescue him. Her own government aren't interested because they don't want to risk giving their former enemies an excuse to come and have another go. But that government is also teetering on the edge of going right down the shitter, the disagreements of multiple factions coming dangerously close to civil war. Kira thinks a popular figurehead like Lee Nalas could stop all of that before it kicks off for real. A call from O'Brien gives Sisko an excuse to leave and say he'll give it some thought. What he's called to see may sway his decision, as it becomes clear any internal conflict on Bajor would affect the station, too. The graffiti Sisko's been brought here to see is a symbol for one of the factions called the Alliance for Global Unity, better known as the Circle, and they're a bunch of racist dicks. They think everyone who isn't Bajoran is lesser and should be removed. Quite how they've squared the circle, so to speak, of trying to claim a Cardigan station when they've said any aliens are inferior is anybody's guess, but bigots are rarely critical thinkers. Either way, it's an indicator of how serious Bajor's current problems are, and something we're going to have to keep an eye on. Sisko's still not sure whether to let Kira have a crack at this rescue attempt, and is mulling the idea over while he plays with an imaginary ball. It is, as he explains to Dax, a potential way of solving the problems on Bajor. He need not have bothered explaining it, as Dax already knows, and she has another positive to add to the equation. If we rescue the guy, there's not much the Cardigans can do about it, as they said they'd already released all Bajoran prisoners. I think it's a bit odd that nobody has floated the idea of this being a massive trap, even though the earring is genuine, but let's see where they're going with this. The answer is to Cardassia 4, the imaginatively titled planet from which this earring was apparently smuggled. And Kira's got some company on the journey too, as Sisko's decided to send O'Brien with her. Maybe he wants to double the plot armour, even if O'Brien's is a bit wonky at times. Besides, he's a better pilot, and has done some science bollocks to the megashuttle to make it look like a cargo ship on scans, so it makes sense to take him. Kira wants him to be under no illusions, though, and once they're in the megashuttle, clarifies that the mission will either end very well, or very badly indeed, with no in-between. O'Brien seems fine with it, and off they go, leaving the rest of us to wonder if Keiko knows about all this. They're still half an hour from Cardassia 4 when they first get scanned. The ploy is working and the ship is showing up as a transport, but it's not perfect. Some technical wibblies make the navigation post scanning them offer to help them with repairs, though Kira manages to blag their way out of it by saying they're transporting something important for a random officer. They eventually arrive at the planet and start scanning a labour camp that we apparently know about somehow. O'Brien set it to only detect Bajorans to make things easier, only to discover that there are a dozen of them down there. That rules teleporting out, as the alarm and shield will be raised as soon as the first pair disappear. A 1 in 6 chance of getting the right guy doesn't appeal to Kira, so it looks like we're going to do this the hard way. The hard way, it seems, is by pretending Kira is a sex worker here for an appointment with the guy in charge of the labour camp. A guard at the fence wants to know her rates with a view to making a deal himself, which is how Kira ends up inside the shield while O'Brien's stuck outside. She gives up subterfuge when she decides just twatting him is the smarter option, and some pooping ensues with what looks a lot like a Federation phaser, so that's us properly involved now. Kira lowers the shield to let O'Brien in, and there's a bit more pooping before we identify Lee Nullis. He doesn't understand what's happening, having apparently not been kept in the loop about the business with the earring. Maybe if he'd been better prepared, he wouldn't have been wounded by one of the guards on their way out of the force field that somebody apparently put back up again after Kira dropped it for O'Brien, but let's ignore that for now. Lee Nullis's injury means the group is slower than it should be, and more guards are gaining, so some Bajorans offer to stay behind and give him a chance to escape. Lee Nullis was the whole point of this rescue, after all. Despite him protesting at the idea, Kira accepts, and the rest of us leg it while our designated sacrifices sell their lives. This is assuming that they even know how to use a Federation phaser, of course, as there's no reason for them to have encountered one before. That's not our problem, though, as we've made it back to the Mega Shuttle. What is our problem is the pair of Cardigan ships coming to find out what the bloody hell's going on. Under the circumstances, it's probably time to bugger off, and hope that none of the writers have thought to check what the top speed of a Gala-class warship is compared to our humble Mega Shuttle. We've made it back without being intercepted, and nobody finds this the slightest bit suspicious. Maybe it's because they're all concerned about Lee Nullis and teleport him over to the infirmary. We'll assume that concern is also why they didn't call ahead and do it as soon as they were in range. While he's getting patched up, Kira goes to see Cisco. He's a bit busy at the moment, though, receiving a call from Gul Dukat, and one that Kira is invited to join. He's calling to let us know that the Cardigan leaders have made a formal apology for their little oopsie at still having Bajoran prisoners. So much so that the others, however many are still alive, are being transported here too as a gesture of goodwill. It's proper dodgy, obviously, and they're both a little thrown by events, but until we understand more about what's going on, there's not much we can do about it, so we'll get Lee Nullis settled in instead. That's going to prove a little more difficult than he'd like. He's being recognised on the promenade and doesn't seem to care for the attention, much like he didn't want to talk to Bashir about his resistance days. His arrival was also noted by the Bajoran government, who weren't willing to lift a finger to help him. One of their ministers has come to Deep Space Nine to meet Lee Nullis, and probably try to take credit for the rescue. His greeting to Kira goes about as you'd expect. First an official bollocking for doing what she did, then an unofficial congratulations. Definitely a career politician. As they're making their way to Lee Nullis, he's getting swamped by supporters. Cisco convinces him to say something to them, if only to make them all bugger off, though it's clear he's not fond of the idea. Just as well, really, as he only gets 2 sentences in before the minister makes himself known and takes over. Trying to bathe in reflected glory is a scumbag move, but at least it means Lee Nullis doesn't have to say anything more. Maybe that would have been better, though, as the minister is building him up to be a saint, and it's clear he doesn't relish the prospect. Being told that he's Bajor's last best hope for peace once Cisco gets him to his quarters probably doesn't help either. Let's leave him to get some rest and join Quark as he's counting out his profits and stiffing his brother on his wages, which is probably fair enough, what with the whole attempted murder thing. Rom goes off for a sulk and possibly to have another think about killing him. From the looks of things, there may be a cue. Some lads whose faces look like Autons from Doctor Who grab hold of him and stick a gag in his mouth. That's so he doesn't scream when they ram the branding iron onto his forehead. Bashir's patching Quark up and thinks there'll be no lasting damage, at least to his flesh. He can't identify the people who did it because of those plastic masks, and it was late at night, so nobody was around to see them on the promenade. I guess we'll also assume those cameras Odo regularly watches in his office didn't spot them either. Lee Nullis is in there during the treatment and interview, which raises a few privacy issues, but let's ignore that for now. He needs to be there to hear this was done by Bajorans, because everything's going to hell on Bajor, and he's the only person that can stop it. Not exactly what he was hoping for, from the looks of things. And Jake's had a shite day too. The date didn't go well. In fact, the date didn't go at all. Her dad forbade her from seeing Jake because he's not Bajoran, her family apparently being caught up in this nonsense with the Circle. Cisco explains some of what's happening right now and how it isn't Jake's fault before sending him off to bed. No rest for Sisko himself, though, as he's being called by a freighter, not normally something he'd be handling personally, but this freighter has a Bajoran stowaway, and one we recognise. It's time for a private chat. Lee Nullas wanted to get himself away from everything that's going on, and with good reason, considering what's expected of him. It would be bad enough if the stories about him were true and he was a legendary leader, but like most legends, they're almost entirely fabricated. He's credited with winning a brutal hand-to-hand struggle with a particularly vicious Cardigan who slaughtered some Bajoran villages. The truth is that, as he was checking out a lake, he accidentally stumbled upon a guy bathing and put a hole in him during the confusion. He didn't even know who it was till somebody else told him. It didn't take long for him to become the hero of 100 battles, none of which he was anywhere near, and all for shooting some schmuck who was standing there in his undercrackers. He tried to explain what really happened, but nobody cares about the truth when lies are more useful. That's all well and good when nobody actually needed him to do anything, but now he's expected to save his entire planet. Sisko doesn't think it matters. It's not about what he does, but what he represents. If a myth brings everybody together, then so be it. The alternative is far worse. The minister from earlier is back, and with Lee Nullas in tow. Actually, that's Navark Lee now, an entirely new title just for him. At least giving him something made up is appropriate, I guess. He's been to Bajor and was greeted warmly by the crowds. Not for long, though, as it was important he get back here. He's got a job to do, after all, says the minister, what with him being the official liaison here now, the one that's replacing Kira. None of them look particularly impressed with that choice, but it'll have to wait, as we're told the story is to be continued. And so it all starts going wrong. We've seen for ourselves here on Earth how independence from another power can often precipitate an internal conflict. It's far easier to unite people behind a glorious future if you're not at the point where you have to define exactly what you mean by it. Bajor then is experiencing what could be considered the logical conclusion of a power vacuum among a people taught to fight. Kira herself has had to come to terms with just how difficult that adjustment is, and she's had help. It's understandable that those who don't live on a nice clean space station with working replicators and comfortable beds might find the switch more difficult, and that's before you start factoring in people who'll feed into their animosity for personal gain. Vedek Sin, the Delphic douchebag, showed us there's no shortage of opportunistic arseholes. How nice it would be to believe there's a single figurehead upon which everybody can agree, a Bajoran Kalesh, if you like. Lee Nullas doesn't want the job, of course, but that's arguably even better for those already in charge. They can just stick him somewhere out of the way and say all of the new edicts come from him personally. All of the power, but none of the responsibility. It's a win-win. The political manoeuvring of those in power on Bajor and those who want to be in power is something we've had ticking over for a while. For the most part, that's been single agitators rather than groups, so having an organisation like the Circle represents a distinct escalation. So too were their actions here on the station. Bajoran stuff up to this point has tended to be more in the abstract, a delineation between out there and in here, despite this being a Bajoran-claimed station. This shows those on DS9, and us viewers, that the matter is no longer something for which people on the station will be merely bystanders. We'll save the rest of our analysis for the next episode when we've seen how it all plays out, but there's something else I want to explore a little before we wrap up. Jake was having issues finding a place to take his date, and that made me think. If most of your social activities are simulated in a holosuite, and your parents or guardians don't want you taking a date there because of the associations they've made, what do you do? A meal at the Replimat or Quark's, perhaps? Other than that, there's not much. The Promenade directory says there's a bowling alley, but then the directory largely exists just for Easter eggs, and so production staff can put their names on things, meaning we probably shouldn't trust it as a reasonable source of data. And this also raises a deeper question about social activities in the Federation generally. At what point does an activity become sufficiently niche that it makes more sense from a maintenance and space viewpoint to just simulate it in a holosuite? We know the Federation is a post-money society and people do things to find fulfillment, so there's no profit motive for running an establishment, but even the most ardent Klingon opera lover isn't going to keep their club open to the public if nobody turns up. It goes deeper still, though, with questions about behaviour in general. How is such a system compatible with the concept of walk-in custom, the people who visit an establishment on a whim rather than having planned it? Does nobody do anything on impulse anymore? Or does it go the other way? Do establishments exist whose entire purpose is to simulate something new each week so regulars can broaden their experiences without knowing what's coming? The idea of a place where I can try something new whenever I visit is a tantalising prospect. If you've been here for a while, you'll know that massive tangents like this are my bread and butter, but I can't help pulling on a loose thread whenever I see it. Jake's little problem about what to do may not have been intended to make people question how a society reconciles the ease of holosuite use against the desire to live in a healthy, social environment. But that's precisely where we ended up, and such unexpected questions are, for me at least, one of the main reasons why I still enjoy doing this. End of episode.
So you see, Your Honor, that this whole thing has been an unfortunate misunderstanding.
That's right. Oh, and taking a shite everywhere were a sign of friendship or something.
Is this the standard excuse you're taught to use? I was hoping to at least hear a new one this time around.
This time? What do you mean this time?
We've already had dealings with your kind before. It didn't work then, and it won't work now.
Hold on a minute, you what?
This is outrageous! S2E01, I've told you that I'm innocent. Why do you doubt the word of a diplomatic envoy? My people shall hear of your shameful behavior.
You need to calm yourself, my friend, or you're going to do another oops on the floor.
His name is Francois! Le ouf!